to the WTM website. So you can access registration on the WTM website, wtmthebreathproject.org. You can also receive reminders about our meeting through signing up for our newsletter. And again, that can be accessed through our website. We will continue to meet the first and third Thursday of every month. We aim to freely provide teachings about mindfulness and related topics. So there are two websites. One is thebreathproject.org, and that has videos about meditation and multiple interviews about mindfulness with expert teachers. And then there's the wtm.thebreathproject.org. In addition to the registration and signing up for the newsletter, there are videos of previous talks, and there's some written resources and some references to other resources outside our website. So it's a valuable resource for you if you're interested in mindfulness. So I also wanted to let you know about two upcoming meetings. They were on the slides. On September 15th, we have Christine Wuschke, a yoga and movement therapist. She is going to talk about mindfulness-based micro-movement for release of tension. And on October 6th, Dr. Phil Bluestein will talk about what is the best meditation for you. Following the talk this evening, we will have a Q&A period, usually going about 30 minutes. We do encourage you to put your questions in the chat box as they arise, and we'll address them at the end of the talk. And you're also welcome to ask for a live audio, but no video chat with our speaker, Marc Landry. We wanted to remind you that the questions you bring up should be related to the topic this evening or mindfulness related questions, and that we are not able to address personal issues. We are not a substitute for individual therapy, for example, or medical care. We are run through donations, so we appreciate anything you can give to us with a suggested $5 minimum donation if you are able. The reason we need donations is because of the technological costs of running the website and sending out the emails. We don't have a volunteer doing that. We hire someone to do that work for us. So we really appreciate anything you can contribute. And again, there is a donation box on the, or button on the WTM website on the home page. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker this evening, and that is Dr. Marc-Antoine Landry. He is a neonatologist working in Edmonton at a neonatal intensive care unit. He began in pediatrics. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Alberta. He has also trained in mindfulness to be a mindfulness coach. And he teaches physicians, medical trainees, and parents of his newborn patients mindfulness exercises to reduce stress, to connect to the present moment and learn valuable insights. He has been the instigator of scientific studies studying the effect of mindfulness on medical training and patient care. And he has written a book called Eat, Transform Your Relationship with Food Through 20 Mindful Exercises to Feel Better and Become More Fulfilled. And he is going to talk about mindful eating this evening. So thank you very much for coming with us this evening, and I'll turn it over to you, Marc.
Thanks, Leslie. I'm going to start sharing screen and we'll get this started. Can you confirm that you see this, the slides correctly, Leslie?
Yes, I can see them.
Perfect. Good. Awesome. So welcome, everybody. So, okay, there we go. Okay, so what are we going to talk about tonight? I wish that by the end of this talk, you'll be able to understand how mindfulness can increase the fulfillment of eating. And I hope that we'll be able to discover a simple mindfulness technique while eating. And as a reminder, you really need to have 3 small food items ideally different. They can be small quantities, like, just to take a few bites from that. And if you prefer to have a beverage, you could have like, if you have 3 different beverages, that's good, but you can have only one, that's okay. And we'll make sure that that works for you when we get to the exercises later on. So the plan of the session tonight, I'll talk a little bit about my story and a bit about mindfulness, obviously, and we'll get right our two, I want to say 2 feet in the practice, but I guess we'll do our mouth in the practice tonight, plus other body parts, and as you will discover. And we'll finish with question and answer, so we'll be interactive. So a bit about me. So as Leslie mentioned, I'm a certified unified mindfulness teacher trainer and lead coach from that organization. I teach medical students, residents, physicians. I'm a newborn physician in Edmonton, nothing to do with eating so far. And I do some mindfulness research project. The most recent one was one that I had the mom of premature babies holding the babies against their torso. We call that skin to skin. And while they were doing that, we were teaching them some easy mindfulness exercises. And we were testing to find out if that would help them to reduce the stress of having a premature baby or depression symptoms that can come after you deliver. And it was effective. So that was really good news. And you'll find that on my website. There's a section for parents and a section about the book. And you'll find all of that if you're interested. And I wrote a book called Eat, as we were talking about earlier. And I do practice mindfulness daily in all my life activities and any situation. So my journey to mindfulness, how mindfulness showed up in my life. So I trained in, if you had not picked up on my accent yet, I'm from Quebec, and I studied medical school in a field of cow. It's called Sherbrooke. And I went to Melbourne, Australia to train as a newborn physician, and also in Halifax in Nova Scotia. I came back here in Edmonton to work as a baby doctor. I worked at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. Before working in Edmonton, I did some locum work in Calgary. I worked at the Foothills, Peter Lockhead, and Rocky View. And I believe they had me work a week at the Alberta Children as well. So during my medical training, life was stressful. It was stressful before too. And I found that doing some music was really helpful to me and to relieve my stress. That was one way that I found helpful, until a lady came to my unit and she dropped by, and then she was doing those drop-in mindfulness sessions. And I discovered that, oh, that's kind of cool. I can do that with the noise of the hospital, with my pager that might just go off, and with the stress of working. And I said, oh, that's pretty cool. I want to do more of that. And that was the moment that it sparked the interest for me to do mindfulness. How has it been beneficial to me over the years? So I like to categorize like my benefits in 5 broad categories. The first one is being fulfilled. And for me, enjoying the present moment has been like a big thing. Like just sometimes like, just today I was walking in a pedway in between two buildings and the hospital. And I just happened to notice the clouds, and it was just so beautiful. And I took a moment just to kind of appreciate that moment, like a little beautiful scenery that was just available to me as I was walking from one building to another. And I just like made like a little kind of a little moment that I felt like that it was quite nice. Insight is the second category of benefits. And I want to say, for me, it was really helpful to practice mindfulness, to discover how my body and mind work together. And for me, that was like an important benefit from the mindfulness practice. Relief is another really important part of why people are attracted to do mindfulness, to be relief of stress or relief of pain, relief of suffering. And for me, stress reduction was a huge advantage that I discovered over the years. Mastery, becoming more skillful. You hear that sometimes people do mindfulness to be better at a sport or better at doing something in their life, to quit a certain behavior or embrace a new behavior. And for me, was becoming more skillful in my communication, especially with my family. with my teenage daughter at the time. And then connection is the next benefit for me, improving my relationships and boosting my empathy for myself, but also for my patients and for my family were other benefits that I derived from practicing mindfulness. And how mindful eating appeared on the map, then but eating is quite pleasurable. Eating is something that kind of is most of the time fun, and it involves all our senses. And as we'll discover, the way I talk about mindfulness is all about becoming clear about the sensory experience: sight, smell, touch, taste, sounds. And also when you eat, maybe you're not aware of it, but you do react to how you eat. You have an emotion or you have a thought. And those reactions may come in the way of enjoying the pleasure of eating. And that's how mindfulness can actually be helpful in boosting the pleasure of eating, and can also be helpful in maybe addressing some behavior around eating. So here's a formula at the bottom of the slide. Fulfillment equals pleasure divided by resistance. If you're not too math savvy, I'm just going to explain what that means. So you have a source of pleasure, so it's a source of fun, something that's going to bring pleasure to you. But to be really fulfilled, what you need to have is have no resistance. A clear example of that: let's say you're eating your favorite food, whatever that is. Just think about what is your favorite food. And then sometimes we'll take the first bite, and we'll be thinking about the second bite, and thinking about the third bite, and thinking about like taking another from the fridge or from the closet or whatever. And that thinking prevents us from being in the moment and enjoying every single bite of our favorite food. So basically, we're not having that much pleasure about the food that we really like because we're overthinking about it, and we're not in the moment enjoying the pleasure. So that's an example of how a certain amount of resistance decreases our fulfillment. Now, mindfulness is all about getting clear, allowing the sensory experience, and also our internal reactions. We don't want our reactions not to exist, but just want to become clear about what they are and be able to allow them to be as they are. And then to be able to kind of just like, be in the present moment of all those things happening in our sensory experience. So mindfulness is a tool that can bring a deep fulfillment because it can help you to decrease the resistance by being okay with that resistance. So that resistance is no longer gripping on you and preventing you from something. So the question that comes to my mind would be, what if being really fulfilled in the moment, how would that transform how we nourish our own body? And this is where my mindful eating is coming from. This is where, how can we just be really fulfilled and transform how we bring nourishment to our own body? So the book actually came after a retreat that I went to. I went to actually a few retreats where we were practicing different techniques. And then it was lunchtime, and we were encouraged to continue the mindfulness. That was mindfulness retreats. Encouraged to do mindfulness exercises during lunch. And I kind of like said, oh yeah, what if I do that thing and that thing and that thing? And then I had all those ideas popping in my mind. And I said, oh, I could actually write something for the participants. So I just wrote like little ideas for all the participants. But then after a while, I said, like, it became organized by itself. I said, oh, I could just write a book about it. All those ideas. And then that's how the book came into life. And it's available on, here I put a QR code here for Amazon, but it's available on Indigo chapters, those things. And tonight, I would like that we explore mindful eating with that kind of like a paradigm to boost the pleasure of eating and to be completely fulfilled, at least like more fulfilled. Now let's talk about mindfulness just a little bit. So mindfulness, you are already, as a group of people coming to those activities, you're already familiar with mindfulness. And you may already know that there's disagreement in terms of the scientists to describe what mindfulness is exactly. And sometimes there's confusion, even in people who've done mindfulness for a long time. They would confuse mindfulness practices with what mindfulness is. For example, focusing on the breath is a mindfulness practice. But if you talk to someone, oh, I do mindfulness and I whatever about mindfulness, they may think mindfulness equals focusing on the breath, but mindfulness is way larger than that. The most common definition is the one from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who created the movement mindfulness-based stress reduction, and it's pay attention in particular way on purpose, the ability to be in the present moment, non-judgmental attitude towards your own experience. But I prefer a skill-based definition of mindfulness. This is the one that we use in Unified Mindfulness. We define mindfulness as 3 attentional skills working together. The 3 skills are the ability to be concentrated, basically to focus on what you want, the ability to be clear about your sensory experience, to know like, okay, this is what's happening in my visual field, in my body, in my emotional body, in my thinking, in what I hear, etc. And then equanimity, as defined as having sort of a hands-off relationship to the sensory experience. What I mean by that is, let's say I am at work or I'm doing this presentation and there may be a hint of stress in my body. I'm aware of it, but I'm not offering any, I don't want it to go away, but I don't want it to stay longer either. I'm just, okay, that's what's happening. I have that hint of stress. It's manifesting in that way for me in that moment. That's what I would refer to as equanimity. Now, I want you to think about like a recent event in your life, just something maybe that happened today or yesterday that you really enjoyed, something that was very present in any ways that is relevant to you. And most likely one of those 3 skills were already high for you. Maybe in that moment, you were quite focused on the task or focused on the activity, that nothing could take your focus away from it. That means that your concentration was on the high side. Or maybe for you, you had that sense that everything was vivid. Every details of that situation was kind of bright, like a nice scenery that for you, that was meaningful. And that may be because your sensory clarity was high. Or maybe you were just having that moment that was pleasant, that you had that hands-off relationship with. You didn't want that moment to go away, but in the meantime, you didn't want to grasp on it. You were just cool with it. And that would be like your equanimity was high. I'm saying that because I want to say that all of us are mindful in a way. Mindfulness is not something that you have or you don't have. And having a skill-based approach to it means that, you know, we all have certain skills, and those skills can be trained and they can be increased and they become more available on demand. And that's a bit my kind of preferred approach to mindfulness, which is compatible with all the other ones. It's just one way of talking about it. So it's going to be practice time soon. We'll have 3 5-minute exercises, and we'll need those three food items, small pieces. So if you haven't gotten them and you want to go grab them quickly, it's still time. I'm going to talk about how to do the practice, and then we'll get into it. So whenever we have a mindfulness exercise, basically there are 2 kind of things that must happen. First, you need to know what you're going to focus on. There's a sensory experience that you want to focus on. I'll get more details in the next slide about that. And there's a how to. How are you going to focus? Basically the instructions of the exercise. Sensory experiences that you can focus on. You can focus on anything. So you may be familiar with focusing on the breath. That's one type of sensory experience. Breathing, you experience that in your body. You feel maybe the motion of your chest, motion of air going through in and out your nostrils, the motion of your abdomen. This is the type of sensation that you feel that you can detect. Or you could actually decide to do a mindfulness exercise with something that you see, something that you hear. Could be on just hearing the music or hearing the silence in the room, or hearing a sentence that you say to yourself. That could be something like that, like a mantra. Or you could decide to do a mindfulness on something that you feel. If you're familiar with body scanning, when you go from the tip of the tip of your head to the tip of your toes, top of your head to the tip of your toes, then you discover all the sensation that you have in your body as you move your awareness down to your toes. That's basically detecting some sensations in the body. You could do a mindfulness exercise on what you smell, what you taste, but also maybe less intuitively, you could also do mindfulness exercises on how you move, how you walk, how you write, or how you paint, how you play music, how you speak, even how you think. And that's really interesting to do that about how the thinking process is happening, or even more subtle, how you focus, how is your focus happening? And you can just be mindful of that. So that those are all the potential ways that you can basically observe. And then how to do it. So this is like a generic way of maybe categorizing how to do it. But essentially, and we'll do it like together, like a step by step, there are 4 general phases on how we do a mindfulness exercise. First, you will acknowledge a sensory event. Then there's an option to use a label or not. And then you would focus on the actual sensory event. If you do a brief focus, that could be 3 to 15 seconds, but you could do a longer focus, like as long as it lasts, or like as long as you're able to focus on it. And then you would release your attention. And then typically you just go into that cycle over and over. And then depending on the technique instructions, it might be a little different. You may be emphasizing the focus phase, maybe emphasizing the acknowledge phase, etc. Acknowledge. So just in this moment, we'll just do an example. You're watching the computer, you see me on your computer, you may see something else around you. Just let your eyes go anywhere in the room or even on the computer screen, and just acknowledge that your eyes are basically getting onto something. Either you bring your gaze to something specifically, for instance, I'm going to look at my computer screen, or your eyes are actually drawn to something, and then drawn to something outside the box of your computer screen. Whether it's something very specific, very small, or large as your entire visual field, it doesn't really matter, but there's an acknowledgement in that moment. If you were to do a mindfulness exercise, that's called the acknowledge moment. After that, there's an option to use a label. Labeling is actually supporting that you are acknowledging and you are into a mindfulness exercise. Typically, when we label, we use just one word, a word that is descriptive, but not like a description. So let's say I'm doing that thing that my eyes are just looking at anything around me. Every time my eyes would acknowledge something, I would say see, because it's a visual activity, see like to see. But I wouldn't say, oh, yeah, I see my watch, that, oh, I forgot to plug it. And oh, man, the battery is going to be depleted. No, I'm not describing what I'm seeing and having like a conversation. I'm just using a simple word as a label. And the label can be personal, or it could be a generic label. It doesn't really matter. It's just like an option, a tool. And then the third phase is the focus phase. And again, I invite you in this moment to acknowledge anything in your visual experience. And I invite you to focus actively on it. So we'll do a good 10 seconds where you're going to just focus, becoming curious about that thing that you see. So right now, there's something that you see. You keep your eyes on it, not with any strain. You're not straining to keep your eyes on it, but you're just like, focusing on it, trying to remain your focus there. And you become curious, interested in the details of that thing. Like if it was the first time ever that you looked at it. And then it's way longer than 10 seconds now, but we can continue that. That would be an active focus. But sometimes, life brings an experience to us, and our attention is actually passively focusing on it. Let's say you're listening to music, and then your attention is kind of drawn into that music, that melody, and you're not doing anything about it, but you know that you're kind of like listening to that. That would be another example. Either or work. And again, the technique instructions may emphasize how you would do a specific mindfulness exercise. And lastly, there's the release phase. The release would be when you stop focusing on that something. So it could be active, that you decide I'm looking at something else right now. I'm going to bring my attention elsewhere. Or it's passive. There's a big other sensory event, or not even big, but just like another sensory event that grabs your attention. And then it's yanked to that other sensory experience. And that the release was passive. You did not really willingly decide to move your attention, but you had no choice but to go elsewhere with your attention. And then so those 4 phases, acknowledge, label, focus, release. When we do our exercises, you may want to think about that, because that's going to be helpful in terms of what we're going to be doing anytime soon. And I'm going to give you an example. I think I kind of covered the example quite well. I'm going to remove that slide next time. So what to watch out for in any mindfulness exercise? There might be some challenges. The most common challenges, generally speaking, would be that, what you're trying to focus on is subtle, is very subtle to detect. Let's say you're focusing on the airflow at the tip of your nose, and then you barely feel it. You're not able to detect it. It's just too subtle for you. That may be a challenge, but it's still good. Even though if it's subtle to detect, you're still focusing on whatever subtle sensory event you're focusing on. So if you think about the 3 skills that we talked about earlier, you're putting concentration effort to focus on that sensory event, and you're becoming clear about that subtle event. So you have clarity around that very tiny and minute sensory event that you are focusing on. And then the equanimity part, which was the 3rd skill, then if you have reaction because it's too hard, and then your brain starts firing, I can't do that, or you have a reaction in your body, you feel ashamed of yourself, or whatever that is, then those reactions, you can leave them in the background of your attention, not wanting to repress them, but allowing them to be there as they are, and keep focusing on that tiny, subtle sensation. So even with subtle stuff, you can develop your skills of mindfulness. Distraction is the most common issue that people encounter. And the most common distraction is your own mind. You have thoughts that just fire randomly, or they're there, the inner microphone here, it wants to kind of take control of what's going on here. So, and that's just another sensory event in a way. A thought is just a thought. And then that could be a distraction. Discomfort in the body, there's an itch, you need to scratch. Your body is not comfortable in the chair, you need to adapt the posture. There's a sound in the environment. All those are examples of distractions. And what do you do when those arise? Whether you do it like as you would do with like the difficult sensation, you basically do your best to stay focused with whatever you're focusing on. You acknowledge maybe how that distraction is impacting your focus, and how that distraction is impacting your way of relating with that sensory event in that moment. And that's rich information. It's really kind of like, this is what is present for you in that moment. So it's really rich. So it's not like a failure. It's just basically just what's happening in that moment. And the third, I would say, biggest challenge is sleepiness. Especially when we do a mindfulness exercise, we slow down our brain waves. We go from highly stressed brain waves to kind of more relaxed brain wave. And typically when we do that, it's because we're going to sleep. That's how we've kind of trained our body and brain, is just to relax and sleep. And now we're trying to do a mindfulness exercise. So it may take a while before you get into the habit of just kind of calming down your whole body and not going to sleep immediately. If that happens when you do an exercise, you can always open your eyes. Having natural light or artificial light may help you to remain awake. And you can always do a mindfulness exercise standing up. It's pretty rare that people fall asleep while they stand up. So you can always do that if that happens to you. Now with eating, it might be interesting enough that you won't fall asleep, hopefully. So how do you sit when you do that mindfulness exercise? What we're going to do in a few moments. Sit comfortably. Take care of your body. If you have any kind of special injuries in your body, just do it as that would make you feel comfortable. If you can straighten your spine, go ahead. That may help you to feel alert. And I encourage you to have your feet on the floor. But if that's not your preferred posture, you want to cross your legs, you want to sit on the floor, you want to sit on a meditation cushion, Just do what you want. The goal is to be relaxed, but yet alert. And the eyes, so when we are going to do our mindfulness exercises, there will be moments where I'll ask you to look at the food. So ideally, your eyes should be open at that moment. And then after that, when we do other parts of the experiment with food, you could have your eyes closed or open. You can play with it and see what works better for you. And that's all good. Zoom camera. So if that was an option in any mindfulness exercise, with me, you could just have it turn on or off, but I think here there was already other guidance, so we'll just respect that. So we'll move on with our first exercise. And then what we'll do, I'm just preparing a timer here for myself to be able to be on time with that. We'll do about a minute that we're going to just look at the food, just with our eyes. So in that moment, we'll become curious about the food with our vision, our sensory experience of what we see from the food, looking at the details of the food, the colors, the shape of the food item. If you have a beverage, that works. You can look at the container, or you could look at the beverage that you see in the container. Be creative to make it flexible for you. The second part, we'll do feeling of the food item. So for me, I'm going to start with, I have a little piece of carrot. So I'll feel it with my hand. I may just play with it a little with my hands. I may just you feel the texture, its temperature, and things like that. And after that, we'll smell it. We'll smell it for 45 seconds. So if you don't smell anything, that's okay. Remember that subtle sensations are good sensations still to work with in a mindfulness exercise. So just do your best to kind of see what you smell from the food item. And then if you don't smell anything, that's okay. After that, we'll incorporate the emotional reaction in the body. So if you feel that the food item remembers you of something and that feels that nice feeling of nostalgia of that moment, something, just focus on how you feel that nostalgic thing in your body. If you feel that food item makes you feel a burst of joy, discover where is that burst of joy in your body. If that food makes you feel something that is on the opposite side of the emotional scale, like it feels like more anxious for whatever reason, detect where you feel that anxiety in your body. And we'll do that for a big 45 seconds-ish. And finally, we'll bring the food to the mouth. And then now in the mouth, on purpose, I did not put taste, I put feel. So I want you with your mouth, with your gum, with your teeth, with your tongue, with your palate, I want you to feel the food as you chew on it. So maybe you want to feel its texture, its temperature, but not paying attention to the flavor, which doesn't mean that there won't be flavors, because there must be flavors in your food item. And they may be bland, but they're still there. And then you just gonna not ignore them, but allow them to be there. That's not what you're paying attention to. You're paying attention to how it feels to chew on that piece of food. And those will be like the 5 steps. So I invite you right now to find that comfortable posture. Have that first piece of food ready, maybe in your hand or just in front of you. I'll do it with you. And now, maybe you like to take an in-breath and out-breath before we start. So let's do that. At your own rhythm, in-breath and out-breath. You may want to drop your shoulders, drop your jaw, just to be relaxed. Straighten the spine. And now you want to start with watching your food item without saying anything to yourself, just having the visual experience. When you look at your food item, pay attention to what you see, the colors, the different textures. Feel free to move the food item with your fingers if you want to, or not. It doesn't really matter. We're just paying attention to what is in front of us as it is. Discovering it like a child would be holding a piece of food for the first time. And now I invite you to feel it with your hand. You can take your both hands if you want, but now you pay attention to the texture or maybe the temperature of your food item. If you have a beverage, you can feel the container with your hands, or you can even dip your finger into the food, the beverage as you want. So again, you're not describing it in your mind. You're bringing all your awareness in your fingers, feeling as you press on the food item, the texture of it. Is it hard? Is it soft? And I invite you to bring it close to your nose or bring your nose close to the food item. And then you can smell. We're just paying attention to the smell. Maybe there's a big burst of the smell as you start smelling, and maybe it fades away right away, or not. Maybe it stays there. Pay attention to those details. Feel free to smell again and again. If it's very, very faint, do your best to detect whatever is present for you. And now as you keep smelling, try to pay attention if there are any emotional reactions to the sense of smell. By this, I mean like any sense of, I don't know, joy, happiness, pleasure. That could be gratitude. That could be sadness. That could be anxiety. That could be any emotions that you feel in your body. Maybe there's no reaction, and that's completely fine. You don't need to have one. And then pay attention to where you feel that in your body. How strong is the reaction, or how subtle is it? And now we'll bring the food item to our mouth. And then when you chew the first bite, pay attention where in the mouth you feel that. How is your teeth coming in contact with the food item, or maybe your tongue or your palate? And as you keep chewing, just experiment. What's the texture of that food? How is it changing in real time in your mouth as you keep chewing? How is the temperature of the food? Are there different kind of textures showing up for you in that moment? And if you have enough to take a second bite of your food item, you can go ahead and take a second bite. And as you swallow, maybe you want to pay attention to how is that food item feel? How does that feel when you swallow it? And that's going to bring it to a close for the first exercise with the first food item. And we'll move on to the second exercise, which will be very similar. But I'll take some time to explain the fifth step. First four steps, exactly the same. We'll watch the second food item, we'll feel it with our hand, we'll smell it, we'll detect emotional reactions, if any. And then when we chew it this time, or when you drink it, I want you to pay attention only to the new sensory events. So by this, I mean, every time you detect something that is quite new, a new texture, a new sensation. Now the food is now touching my palate. That's new. It wasn't there before. It's touching my tongue. It wasn't there before. I'm starting to swallow. That swallowing was not there before. I'm just detecting the new things. oh, maybe there's a new sound as I'm biting on my carrot. It makes a sound that I wasn't there before. I'm detecting those new things. And then we can include the flavors. There's a new flavor that wasn't there. Let's say you have a complex food item that has different flavors. Then there's a new flavor that pops here. So it's just paying attention to what is new. You're not trying to hold on to that new sensation. You're just paying attention as it arises. And then when it's going to do something else, you just don't mind. You just pay attention to the new thing and the new thing and the new thing. It might be one after the other that there's something new. It might be too many to keep track of it. So if too many of them, just keep track of one at a time, that it's a comfortable pace for you. And if they are not that many, it's like it takes a long time for you to take something new. That's completely okay. We're just doing a little experiment to have fun here. So I invite you to take your second food item and can bring it into your hands to watch it, or you can leave it wherever it was before. I invite you to pay attention to the colors, the different shades of the colors that you have. It's just one color, for instance, maybe there are different shades of that color, different textures, maybe little details that you never paid attention before in that food item because you never took the time to look at it in that way. You're just becoming curious and becoming clear about that food item, and especially the visual experience of that food item. Feel free to manipulate the food item to turn it around if you want to, but you don't need to. And now bring it into your hand or your both hands and start feeling the texture. Moving maybe your thumb or your index finger or any other fingers. Just discover. Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it spongy? Is it cold? You don't need to answer any of those questions, but this is what you're paying attention to with your sensory awareness. You're just becoming aware of that without having a need to describe it. Now I invite you to smell that new food item. So bring it to your nose or bring your nose to it. And again, just like detect the smell, detect the aroma as it comes. And if it disappears, maybe bring back the food item and take another puff. Inhale and see if you detect anything. If you don't detect anything, that's all good. If you do detect something, just pay attention to it. And similarly to what we did before, now bring your attention into your body to detect if there are any emotional reaction to the smell. Maybe there's some pleasantness. If there is, try to see where you detect that in the body. Is it in your chest, in your upper abdomen, in your throat, in your face, in your shoulders? Take another smell like of the food item and see if there's anything else that lingers in the body. And now we'll go to detecting the new sensory events as they arise, as you chew or drink your food item. So I invite you to start chewing, but be just very slow in the steps that you take to allow you to detect those new sensory events. As you take the first bite, detect the maybe as the food item touches your lips and then touches your teeth, And then it progresses to the right side or the left side of your mouth. And then maybe detecting the motion against your tongue. That's all those things are new. And maybe there's a flavor now that bursts as you crunch on it. Maybe there's a sound that comes with it. That's new. That sound that pops, you chew, and there's a crunch, and then you hear that. And then now there's time for you to swallow. And then as you swallow, there's new sensations that arise in your mouth. So pay attention just to the new things, one new things after the new thing. If there's enough as a second bite, you can take the second bite. If detecting new sensation is too complex and it doesn't mean anything to you, you can just pay attention to the texture as we were doing on the first exercise, just paying attention to how it feels in the mouth. That's all good. Great. Now I invite you to put that food item aside. And then if they're left over, you can always eat them at the end of the session. And I will move on to the third food item with a third exercise. It's going to be very similar. Just maybe a tiny bit of a twist on it just to offer something new. So again, you're going to watch the food item. You're going to feel it with your hand. And then you are going to smell it and detect the emotions. But now this time, instead of detecting the new and arisings of sensation, we're going to pay attention to what is actually vanishing, what is passing. So for instance, I'm chewing on the right side of my mouth, and then the food is moving to the left side. So there's no longer a sensation. And as the food moves, I detect that that sensation is actually vanishing. Or as I'm swallowing, that one might be easier to detect. As I'm swallowing, I would have detected initially the arising, but as my swallow finishes, then I would maybe feel the disappearance of the swallowing motion. And flavors might be easier to detect as well in terms of their disappearances, because there may be a burst of flavor, and then after a little while, maybe a few seconds, it kind of like it's no longer there. You may be detecting that. Those are examples. Again, if that's too complex, just detect the texture as you move the food item in your mouth. Just pay attention to the texture. So we'll start with the third food item. I want to take another in-breath and out-breath. It's all good. I invite you to start looking at your food item whenever you're ready. And again, pay attention to the texture, the visual textures, the different colors, the shapes, the lines, the circles, the triangles that you may see, some pieces that might be rotten that have a different color, anything that comes into your visual attention. Just look at it. You may want to briefly focus on it. Just like, observe it without moving your visual attention to any other places and becoming very deeply interested in the details for a brief instant, a few seconds, for example. And now I invite you to bring that food item into your hand or your both hands as you want. And again, detect the hardness, the softness, the wetness, the dryness of your food item. You may feel all the little changes that you may detect with your finger as you press on the food item. You may detect the temperature. Maybe it's super cold, maybe it's warm, in between. And now I invite you to bring the food item to your nose or your nose to the food item and start smelling. Just pay attention to the smell of the food item, its aroma. And now detect if there are any emotional reactions as you smell. So keep smelling at your own pace the food item, but your awareness now is in your body, trying to detect if that triggers any positive or other type of reactions. You want to be clear where you experience those reactions. And maybe what the reaction is. Without having to name it, just being aware of it is sufficient. And now you can bring the food item into your mouth and try to detect when you detect the vanishing of a sensory event. That's a little more tricky. So maybe as you take the first bite, as the bite is transitioning from a place in your mouth to another place. Another example would be maybe as you bring the food item to your mouth, you may detect that it touches your mouth, and then as you kind of get the food item inside the mouth, that sensations on your lip no longer is, and it vanishes. So that may be a little thing that you pay attention to. If that's too complex, just the texture in the mouth is completely enjoyable in the moment to detect the different textures. There may be a lot of sensations that are vanishing at the same time. If that's the case, just focus on one at a time and let the other ones be unnoticed. That's okay. You don't need to kind of notice everything. You just notice a few things, one after the other at your own rhythm. And if that's kind of not noticeable at all for you, it's okay. Just notice the textures, the temperature of the food as you chew on it. If you have a beverage, that still works. You can do it with a beverage. You just adapt the instructions. And there we are. That brings us to a close for the third exercise. We can put that food item aside. And then we'll move to the interaction, the period of question and answer that we can have all of us together. And then as was mentioned earlier, I'll invite you to bring your question into the chat box. And I'm gonna just show the book once more. Just if you enjoyed those activities, you'll find way more in the book. And also, I want to not spend too much time on that. If you want me to bring it back later on, I can bring it back later on. But I'm just going to stop sharing screen right now so I can see the chat box and see if you do have questions. Now, type of questions that may come up for you would be maybe there were some particular struggles in doing the exercises. So that could be a nice type of question. You could like try to type it as best as you can. What was the actual struggle? Or another question could be actually just a comment. You could say, oh, I really enjoyed that thing or that part. That for me, I never experienced that before in that way. And it could be just that. And based on your comment, I can extrapolate a little and give more information that can be relevant. So you can feel free to do that.
Hi, Mark. While we're waiting,
Hey.
for the audience members to give you some feedback or questions. I was particularly struck by the last exercise, the disappearance of sensation. That was actually more noticeable to me than a lot of the other, like there was a definite, oh, it's not on the right side, it's on the left side. What does it feel like now on the right side when it's not there? Or the lips, and then there's nothing in the mouth now, it's swallowed. So this is the mouth empty. So thank you for that. That was good.
I like to do both because
Yeah.
it's different for everyone. Some people will relate way more to appearances and arising, and others would relate more to the disappearance. So it's everybody is different. So thank you for sharing that. So yeah, it can be quite enjoyable. And the cool thing with that is that if you focus always on the disappearance or the vanishing of the sensory event, there's a sense of completion that may be interesting, that you can extrapolate that with what we were doing here, what was food, but you could extrapolate that to your emotional life. Let's say you have emotions that you're able to track. You are tracking that you are anxious right now, and then you're able to detect the exact moment that that anxiety subsides in your body. That gives you a tremendous amount of information on your own emotional life. You know exactly when you felt anxious and you no longer feel anxious. You know exactly, you can relate to you kind of like, it's like a thermostat at your own body, that you can have that information live available to you. So,
Okay.
yeah.
We do have a question from
Yes.
Phil. He says, eating disorders such as anorexia and overeating are significant issues in our society. Can you describe some practical and effective mindfulness strategies to help with these eating problems?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I knew some sort of question like that would pop. So I wanted to kind of highlight that mindfulness is a powerful tool to help in changing behaviors. But examples of eating disorder, that's not just the behavior, that's even more powerful. It's something that is like in the brain, how the brain is actually kind of working with food. And so mindfulness can be powerful in helping people to make changes or to support them in their therapy, if they have any therapy for eating disorder, for example. And it can play at multiple levels. Now, what we did tonight was mindfulness of the food because it's enjoyable. All the senses are involved in food, and we can bring up the pleasure of food. But mindfulness can be helpful not just with experiencing food. It could be a mindfulness of anything else that could empower you to make different choices in your life and can support you in any therapy that you have. So I really want to kind of like claim out loud that I don't think that mindfulness of the food itself will cure any disease such as eating disorder. And so I just want to make that clear up front. So I have no such claim, or that being mindful of the food will make you lose 20 pounds in a week. It will support your behavior change, but that's more complex than just being mindful of the food. That's what I want to say. Thank you for the question, Phil.
Okay, and so Mary says, usually I eat my food very fast. It may taste very good and I may overeat. I think if I was to slow down with my eating and become more mindful, I would not eat so much and it would prevent weight gain.
Yeah, that's a really good thought. And then by being mindful, it kind of encourages us to slow down, because you can be mindful of eating fast. That's kind of completely possible to do that. But yeah, if you want to kind of change a behavior, which seems to be in that case overeating, then yes, mindfulness would help you to slow down and maybe feel the satiety earlier, like you feel fullness earlier, and may actually help you to kind of like, enjoy the food that you're eating in the moment, that you may not have that craving for more that may trigger that desire to eat more. So that's, again, a tool to support you, but changing behaviors is tough. So we're hardwired in doing the behavior. We've been conditioned over the years into doing a specific behavior. So it's not just like being mindful of the three food item that we're going to eat. That's going to change the behavior. That's going to be supportive of that. But yeah, I just want to emphasize that.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like we should start in the newborn nursery with this mindfulness.
Exactly.
Get those wires set right.
Oh yeah, get the wire set up front. Yeah.
All right. So Irene says, or sorry, Shuyen says, does mindfulness have to do with procrastination?
Absolutely, that can be quite powerful for that as well. So procrastination is basically a sort of reaction when there's a task, and then you react in a way that you just don't do it, and you do other things to distract you. So then you can certainly have mindfulness to help you when you get the procrastination. There would be different exercises that can help you. What may be, again, it's changing a behavior. So mindfulness is extremely supportive of changing behaviors because it will help you to detect how is your body and mind in the moment of procrastination, and maybe also what just immediately precedes the procrastination. So yeah, absolutely. You can play with mindfulness to help you to change that behavior.
Okay. And then Irene says, when I smelled the pea pod, it suddenly reminded me of the farm where I grew up and eating peas as I picked them. I then thought of my parents who have now passed. I suppose that is a bit of a distraction from the food exercise.
So yeah, that's a really good comment. Thanks for that, Irene. And so then when you were reminded of the farm you grew up, most likely you had a sensation that maybe there was an emotional reaction to you. And now I think that made you think about your parent who passed. And again, maybe there was another type of emotional reaction in that moment. The idea is that was to connect that when we eat and when we smell food, we're not just like smelling, it creates reactions in our body. And then by being clear on where you detect those reactions, you bring mindfulness to it. Now, the distraction would be that if you get lost in a loop of thought, a chain of thoughts, that where you think about how they passed, and then you think about something else that reminds you of this and this and that, then you're completely lost in your thoughts, and then that's a distraction. The cool thing is that when you have a distraction, you know what to do. You just bring your awareness back into your body, for instance. So that's when we were talking about skills earlier. That's when you have a distraction, it's kind of a break of concentration. So if you bring back your awareness onto the exercise, you're building like muscles, that concentration muscles. You bring it back to the focus, constantly doing that. Not punishing yourself for having a thought, not at all. The thoughts are just, they're naturally occurring in the brain. So you have nothing to do with that. So it's just your brain doing its normal job. But when you bring the focus back, you build that concentration. So thanks for that example. That's really relevant.
Okay. So the next one is from Suzanne. How long should we practice the mindfulness with every meal? Question mark. And through that whole meal, but just speeding it up?
So again, it's as you find it relevant to you. So mindfulness exercises can be applied to any life situation. And then my goal with presenting it with eating was that just like we eat 3 times a day, most of us. Some people eat more, some people eat less. And that brings like maybe a few occasions during the day to bring mindfulness in an activity that is quite pleasant. So it might be enjoyable. Now, if you want to do it just for the first few bites, why not? If you want to do it for the entire meal, why not? If you find that you don't have much time to eat, you just have 10 minutes, for instance, and then you do it for the 10 minutes as you eat, at the speed that you eat, cool. That's just like an occasion in your life where you can actually practice mindfulness. So there are many other life activities where you can bring mindfulness to. That's one of them. And just a matter of bringing that new habit into eating.
Okay. And then Catherine says, I've been reading the book because I struggle with overeating. What struck me tonight is that I felt no emotional sensations when eating a non-interesting food item. But when I ate the sweet, I felt tension in my body. more saliva, and the desire, some sort of urge to bring the food closer to me.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for that comment. So that's what is cool about becoming clear about your own body and your own mind while eating. You discover things like that. So this is very kind of like, I want to say, important information to you, because you discover that when you eat something that is sweet, maybe there are specific sweets that might do some type of reaction and others that won't. But that information is there to inform you. And because you're mindful of it, then you are better equipped to make choices, to make food choices. Maybe you realize that when you eat your sweet at the beginning of the meal, for instance, that may create something for you, that when you eat it at the end of the meal, that creates something else, and you can play with that. And because you brought mindfulness to your eating, then you're aware of those things that you would not have been aware before. So I congratulate you on being clear, already clear on those subtle but yet significant sensations and thoughts that you discovered that are true to you and that are relevant to you.
Okay, and then Richard family, somebody in the Richard family says, I found it so interesting that when I smelled one of my foods as I opened the container, I thought the smell was unpleasant. But after I manipulated it, those pieces were pleasant and had layers of smells.
Cool. Hey, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So in a few comments now, we are highlighting, so the skills of sensory clarity. I see that you had like the layers of smell. That's already clear about the smells. If you are able to kind of differentiate between different layers of smell, that's awesome. That's the skill of becoming clear about the sensory event. So that's what we want to do. Now we're doing it with food, but you could do it with different emotional reactions. You could do it with different any experience of your life. You can become that clear, and that increase the richness and the vividness of your life, of your sensory experience.
Okay. So we'll wait to see if there's more questions. I could comment on my experience while we're waiting for somebody else. I was surprised because one of my food items was mango, and I associate mango with pleasure. But when I smelled the mango, it really had very little smell. It was when I tasted it that the pleasure arose. And I just was surprised because I never realized that the smell was not very strong. So I had probably just looked at the mango and thought that it probably smelled good because I was already thinking about how it was going to taste.
Interesting, eh? So
yeah.
Maybe let's try to kind of, if you have okay to do that with me, let's try to retrack your sensory experience like just a little more. So when you watched it, you had maybe some thoughts about how it was going to taste, and that generated some pleasure.
Yes.
Yeah. So were you able in that moment to track all of that? So that you were watching it, were you able to track that you had visual or auditory thought about the mango?
I think it was more like I'm a body sensation person.
Okay,
I feel things in my body. So it was more like a feeling in the body of pleasure.
So you had kind of that memory of the taste of mango, and that created already some pleasure.
Yeah.
And then were you able to track where the pleasure was in your body?
I think it was in my belly and my mouth.
Cool. Awesome.
I believe so.
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. And then after that, you smelled it. And then was there any disappointment that or something that came with the smell?
I was like, let's get on to the next part.
Please.
Gee, a minute, 45 seconds is a really long time.
It is. It can be long when it doesn't smell much. Okay. Could you are you able to kind of remember where you felt that kind of mini disappointment that came with the smell? That was, do you remember where you feel?
Well, kind of in my shoulders. I think in my upper chest, like, ooh. Let's go on to the next thing.
And did you remember if you had those thoughts were coming up into your mind? Let's go on to the next thing.
Yes, they were. Yeah.
Okay. Good. And then when you had those thoughts, do you know if they were something that you would hear yourself say? It was more like something more visual that you heard yourself say.
Hear myself say.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, so see, and I'm just like using your example now as for everyone to demonstrate that you can become clear about all those things happening one after the other. And then, there's nothing wrong about having that kind of mini disappointment and having those thoughts, but you can become clear about that. And that can influence you in terms of the next behavior, the next action that you're going to do, just being clear what's happening. So,
yeah.
good.
Okay, we have another question. You ready for it?
Yeah, thank you.
So from Phil, we have, you talked of the equanimity of mindfulness, the capacity to be in a balanced mind no matter what arises. And Phil says, the problem is that we self-reference and judge every experience to ensure that we are safe, loved, and worthy. How is it possible to bring equanimity to the moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the way I see it, so I just want to reframe my definition of equanimity, but it's pretty much what Phil wrote there. It's pretty in line with that. It's being able to have a hands-off relationship to the sensory experience. So I'm going to give an example with what you just said, Leslie, if that's okay. Yeah, good. So in Leslie's experience, when she had that micro moment where she was disappointed in the smell, there was a reaction in her body, and there was also a thought, let's move on to the next thing. So having equanimity with that would mean that, there's that disappointment reaction sensation in the body, like the arching behind, and then you're okay with that. You're not trying to make that reaction go away. You're not having the judging of the judging of the judging. So you already have that reaction. And then you say, cool, I'm currently disappointed. And that's what's happening. And then maybe that manifests with thoughts, that those thoughts are, I want to move on to the next thing. And then you're okay with that. There's okayness with everything in a sense. So, and that may actually cut the loop of judging the judging of the judging. So that self-referential part that Phil is talking about, where we judge the experience and we judge the judging, it goes into that loop of thoughts. Then it's cut by having equanimity. It's a process. It's obviously not necessarily present at the first mindfulness exercise, but the more you practice mindfulness, the more you bring that equanimity with it. And the more you realize that you have less gripping or less pushing away of those reactions, those thoughts. And then you have that okayness with anything that happens in the moment. And it's important in a way that it helps us to really, really genuinely change our behavior and change how we present ourselves into the world. And by being able to have that equanimity with our own reactions, this is how we can actually change our behavior. And then that's I want to say maybe the key element of any mindfulness program or exercise that you try to develop, whether you're aware of it or not.
Okay, so we'll just give you an opportunity to share maybe some of your experiences with mindful eating.
Yeah, so yeah, to be kind of like, it's interesting sometimes, like people thought that maybe someone who's wrote a book would be like super mindful while eating every single piece of food, but no, I find that it's really challenging. I find that eating is something that we do on the autopilot most of the time, and then we realize that, oh, time is gone, and then I forgot to be mindful. So what I do in those situations when I'm just like eating and realize in the middle of it that, oh, I'm eating fast today, or I'm not even paying attention to my food, in exactly that moment, that's my trigger. Cool, this is my warning, that's my red flag. Okay, it's time to be mindful in that moment. Whatever happened before, I have no control on that, but in that moment, I'm going to just take the time to become mindful. So whenever that happens to me in that way, that's one way for me to remind myself in that moment. I may not slow down if I need to eat quickly because I need to move on to something else for whatever the reason. then I may just be mindful of that quick food that I'm eating. I may pay attention to only the texture, only what I see, or only one other aspect that interests me in that moment, just to keep my mindfulness going. And that would be something. Eating with kids is very difficult, uh, because like kids have like lots of demands. They are around the table, and then you kind of sit down and they're already finished and you haven't started, and there's all the demands. So it's kind of hard to eat when you're with your family, and also other situation that makes it hard to eat mindfully with you when you're in a situation that is a conversation going. But you can still be mindful in the background of, and you keep, maybe the focus would be the conversation. You want to be present with the person you're with, but in the background, you keep a tiny bit of your awareness on the texture of food or the flavor of food. Or every time you take a bite, when you put your fork in the plate, you pay attention of the visual aspect until the fork happens to arrive in your mouth. And then that could be, tips and tricks that may work to keep a mindfulness exercise happening despite all the potential challenges. But when you do a mindfulness exercise, when you want to quote unquote have the impressions of succeeding, having a good mindfulness like practice session, you want to eliminate all the potential distractions. So obviously you want to do it by yourself. It's much easier in an environment where you won't be distracted. So not in front of your TV or with the radio turned on or with your phone or anything. So you keep it like, light, easy, and then you add on the challenges. You had maybe like doing it in a conversation, doing it like in a stressful situation. You do it in, you kind of go up the ladder, and then you can practice the mindfulness with, extra weight on your bicep curls, I want to say. I think there's another question that popped.
Yes. I do want to just ask something before we move on to that question, because it kind of changes the topic. Why did this particular area of mindfulness rise for you as one that was particularly interesting for you, the mindful eating? What is it about your experience that made that important for you to look at?
So in terms of the mindful eating, how was that to me? Yeah. So yeah, that's a very good question. So for me, I think that I want to say eating is, I think it's one of the area that I find one of the most challenging to bring mindfulness to. I find it, I do mindfulness when I run. I do mindfulness when I'm doing my job as a physician. I'm doing mindfulness. There's a safe mindfulness practice to do when you do drive a car. There's only one like a kind of type of exercise you can do that is safe. I do it that way, but I really find it challenging with eating. It's like the challenge. I think that kind of like attracted me in a way, because I find that eating is such a habit that it just goes on autopilot, and we just finish eating and we just, oh, where did the time go? And then you just forgot. And it is such a rich moment. And my wife cooks extremely well. She could be a chef. So, and then combining all of that for me was kind of like pushing me to kind of develop mindfulness in there. And it's still pushing me, and it pushes me like to kind of bring it every day. I try to remind myself to bring it to my feet, to my different meals.
Okay, thank you. So the question is, how does mindfulness help medical staff?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a lot of like publications on that, and there's a lot of like people that researched around that topic, but essentially it will help medical staff as it will help anybody. So 5 main domains where mindfulness can be helpful. It can help you to be more fulfilled in your life. So it's really kind of like, I like to see mindfulness as, what does it bring to you as a human being? Where are the areas that are important to you to feel more happy with your life? So for some people, it's to just be more fulfilled. For some people, it's to have some sense of relief. And that's the most part where people would do mindfulness, is to be less stressed, to have less chaos in their own mind or chaos in their emotional life, feeling more able to relate to their emotional body, to not cut off from their emotions. and then be able to make better choices for themselves, for their patients, for their interactions with people. Those would be areas where people would generally kind of ask support. And it's all around, really, like, I want to say, when I ask the residents and the students and the physicians, why did you take that mindfulness class? I want to say maybe 80-90% would say to relieve me from stress. And some would say other things, like just to, the other things that I just mentioned. And it does help people in the medical profession, but it does help anybody. It's like the same for anybody. So it happens that I'm a physician, so people can relate to me in that way when I teach them. But it's a universal tool. It's everybody has some degree of mindfulness, whether they're aware of it, and then everybody can develop way more mindfulness, and just to be more happy.
Okay. Because you're a neonatologist, and we're talking about the nervous system and so on, this is a little off topic, but what has evolved in the knowledge of how to reduce the trauma to newborns who are, in the intensive care? What has evolved over time so that it isn't a traumatic memory, or lessens that trauma to their nervous system?
That's very interesting that you asked that question, because my colleague is like an expert in what's called developmental care. And he works with the same paradigm of trauma-informed medicine, or trauma-informed like approach that we would see, like the vagal theory and polyvagal theory and all of that. And in the preterm, there were people like, maybe I want to say, I think 30 years ago, that developed like an approach to evaluate the newborn and to look at the autonomic response of the baby, the motor state of the baby, the awakeness of the baby, to evaluate how the baby is ready to receive maybe someone to touch him, or someone to interact with him or her. And so there is that knowledge that is available, and mindfulness plays a huge role there, because obviously, if you're not paying attention to what you're doing, you miss all those cues, and those cues are available. Babies are expressing themselves in that language that is not like a verbal language, but it's more like how their body behaves, and that's available. So there is work, and it's increasing in terms of like how people are using that work, but it's still very, in some places use more of that work than others.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Another question
Yes.
from Irene: can mindfulness help young children with ADHD, and are there certain mindful exercises available for them?
Yeah, so I guess like to find the right exercise depends on the age group, and the answer is clearly yes. There are adults with mindfulness, with ADHD, and use mindfulness, and it's impressive how that helps them. It may not like get the ADHD out of the way, but it certainly helps to bring an element of focus, and to decrease maybe what comes. ADHD is not isolated. When you live with ADHD, there's other spheres of your life that are affected. And then there may be an associated anxiety that comes with it. There may be other thoughts, there are other things that you react with life differently. And mindfulness can help with those layers as well as helping the focus itself. So, and then for children, then there are people who specialize with children mindfulness, that there must be out there some good resources on that. But yes, it's been documented. The challenge is that to have the child to be interested in that, and yeah, that's always a question of piquing the interest.
That's true. So we are coming close to the end of our presentation. So Marc, I wanted to thank you, and also give you a chance to summarize something, that the essence of what you would like people to take home from your presentation.
Yeah, I think like the true learning objective that my goal was for you tonight was to experience the formula that fulfillment equals pleasure divided by resistance, and that formula, uh, meaning that there's a source of pleasure and there's resistance that comes from your own reactions. And then if you kind of realize just experientially right now tonight that yes, I know what you mean by that. When I do have resistance, then my pleasure is still the pleasure, but my fulfillment is less, then I would have achieved something if you have experienced that just a tiny bit. And the second part was just to make it like fun, that you experience like mindfulness with food and it was actually fun to do. And that encourages you to do more mindfulness, maybe with food or maybe with something else.
Okay. And we have thank yous coming in on the chat box. And I wanted to add a final thank you to the Calgary Public Library, and particularly to John, who was here helping us this evening, the CPL moderator. And then remind people about our next talk on September 15th, which is Mindfulness-Based Micro-Movement for Release of Tension with Christine Wuschke. And then I wanted to give John an opportunity to come back in if he has any final remarks that he wants to make on behalf of the library.
Yeah, mostly thank you both very much for a very, very interesting and enlightening program tonight. I definitely experienced my crackers and chocolate in a very different way, so it was very, very nice. So thank you very much. And to everyone else who joined us this evening, thank you for joining us. And hope everyone has a wonderful evening. If you enjoyed this program and would like to find others similar to it, you can find some similar ones on calgarylibrary.ca/programs. And again, thank you everyone very much for joining us tonight.
Okay, thank you.